Friday the 13th Part 3 was the series' first and only attempt at delivering its scares in 3D. In theaters, it was known as Friday the 13th Part 3D, although until DVD, the home video versions never incorporated the 3D elements. It still baffles me that Shout Factory's box set includes the only true 3D Blu-ray of the film, but it was released years after 3D televisions were phased out. Way to drop the ball on that one, guys. At the time, Part 3 marked a technical landmark for Paramount because 3D was a gimmick that hadn't been implemented since the 50s. They had to develop a production system called Aerovision, which involved manufacturing special projection lenses that would allow the audience to see the 3D in theaters. In layman's terms, it wasn't the gimmicky blue and red 3D that was presented on DVD. I never saw the true 3D version of the film, but part of the reason I think this one is so forgettable is because so much of the film is designed around those 3D shots, and most of the time you just get a bunch of idiots throwing things at the camera. There's a snake, a baseball bat, someone's detached eye comes flying at you. It all sounds impressive on paper, but watching it in 2D makes it all pointless. There are some impressive gore effects, but this is the first one where I could really feel the impact of the ratings board. Again, we don't have Tom Savini, so a lot of the kills are done with quick cutaways. The film takes place one day after Part 2 and begins just down the street at a railway diner/grocery store? We see unmasked Jason lurking in the shadows, which is admittedly creepy. It starts out with just the right atmosphere. As you can guess, the couple who own the diner, Harold and Edna, don't last very long. The focus then shifts to our new set of characters, led by Chris, who's taking her friends out for a nice weekend at the family farm. The actual location of the film is Higgins Haven, although let's not kid ourselves. It still takes place in the woods. There's Andy and Debbie, a couple of dumb college kids who got themselves pregnant.
I'm driving.
No way, we're pregnant, remember?
I can't shake the idea that the only reason we're given that information is so that we'll feel bad for Debbie when she inevitably bites the dust. As if we could ever feel bad for most characters in the series.
Damn it, Shelley! Why do you do these stupid things?
There's Vera Sanchez, who set up on a blind date with this film's prankster, Shelley. It's established right out of the gate that Shelley is just craving attention, constantly digging around in his bag of tricks so he can continue to draw attention to himself.
God damn it, Shelley. Why do you always have to be such an asshole?
When I was younger, I found Shelley more relatable, but I can also understand why everyone reacts to him the way that they do.
Chris, leave him alone. He doesn't know any better.
He has zero self-esteem, and the people he's tagging along with don't make him feel any more welcome. Then you have the token stoners, Chili and Chuck. The less said about them, the better. There's also Rick. Chris's romantic interest, who's seeking to rekindle the time they spent together. I feel like they tried to needlessly develop these characters when you just know most of them aren't going to come out alive. In the first two films, the characters had almost no personality, so while you didn't really care when they died, they were still kind of likable. I admit, I had fun hanging out with them. This film has the opposite problem. Yes, the characters seem to be more fleshed out, but I'm not rooting for any of them. It's the first film in a long line of entries where I'm rooting for Jason to gut them all. It's also very routine, and the California setting detracts from the eerie atmosphere of a secluded New Jersey campground. There's a scene where Shelley and Vera have a confrontation with a motorcycle gang. Things escalate, and the biker gang tracks Shelley back to the barn, where they end up getting eviscerated by Jason. Let's talk about Jason. In the first film, we're not even sure if Jason is a real thing. He's essentially a legend. When he rises up from Crystal Lake as a boy to attack Alice, we're pretty sure she's just imagining him. In Part 2, because of a lack of ideas, Jason becomes the killer, a fully grown forest dweller who stumbles around but still knows his way around the woods. He's a pretty efficient killer. In Part 3, Jason is played by Richard Brooker. Brooker decided to play the character with just a little more cunning. He feels more methodical, taking his time to lurk around the area. He stalks around for a bit rather than in Part 2, where he seems to strike immediately after he sets his eyes on his prey. It goes without saying, but in every film when they reveal Jason's face, he doesn't match the look that came before. I'm fine with that. It's one of those things that makes the series so fascinating as a whole. But when you go from his look in Part 2 to Part 3, it's gotta be one of the most jarring transitions in the whole franchise. In Part 2, he's basically a big, deformed mountain man. His look in Part 3 is more or less carried over from the mongoloid look of Part 1, but what's baffling is just how much it strays from the previous film. The movie only takes place one day later, and both movies were directed by Steve Miner. You can tell the filmmakers didn't care about continuity because during a flashback sequence in which we see Chris trying to evade Jason years earlier, he's got the shaved head look, which immediately contradicts what we saw in part 2. Again, if I spend too much time thinking about the continuity, I'd be here until next year. A lot of people know that this is the first movie where Jason puts on the hockey mask. Originally, the mask was part of Shelley's joke arsenal until Jason claims it for himself. In reality, the hockey mask was originally used as a placeholder for whatever the final look of the character was supposed to be. However, the crew liked it so much that it became a staple of the film, and hence, the iconic vision of Jason was born. With the first 2 films, the climax was the best part. In part 3, the chase toward the end is suspenseful until it isn't. In the film's final moments, Chris strikes Jason directly in the head with an axe, and he continues to lurch after her like the Frankenstein monster. It's pretty cheesy. However, it's interesting to note that this one injury carries over through most of the later sequels. Like a lot of horror sequels, this one gets lost mainly because it gets sandwiched between 2 superior movies, Part 2 and Part 4, the final chapter. It's entertaining, but at the end of the day, none of the kills really stand out, and I really wanted everyone to die. I would say you could skip this one and go directly from Part 2 to 4. You won't miss anything.